The rain had not stopped for 3 days when Lady Evelyn Harrow stood alone beneath the tall windows of Blackthorn Manor, listening to servants whisper about her marriage as though she were already a ghost wandering the halls. She was only chosen because her father owed debts. Duke barely speaks to her. They say he still loved another. The words drifted through the corridor like cold smoke. No one lowered their voice enough. Evelyn kept her gaze fixed on the storm outside, though her hands trembled slightly against the folds of her dark blue gown. 6 months ago, she had arrived at the manor believing marriage might soften loneliness. Instead, it had only given her loneliness a larger home. Behind her, the doors opened quietly. Duke Adrian Blackthorn entered with a familiar stillness that seemed to follow him everywhere. Tall, composed, impossibly unreadable. Even the servant straightened when he passed, as though the air itself feared disappointing him. He removed his gloves slowly. "You missed supper again," he said. Evelyn swallowed the ache rising in her chest. "I was not hungry. You should still eat." Was no cruelty in his voice. That was almost worse. Cruelty at least carried emotion. Adrian spoke to her with the same calm distance he might offer a stranger seated beside him at a formal dinner. He moved toward the fireplace, eyes on the letters in his hand. For a moment Evelyn watched him quietly, the sharp line of his jaw, the exhaustion hidden beneath his composed expression. The man she had spent months trying to understand. "You need not concern yourself with me, Your Grace," she said softly. Something flickered across his face before vanishing. "I am your husband," he replied, but he did not sound like one. That night, Evelyn cried silently into her pillow while thunder rolled across the distant hills, not because Adrian was cruel. Not because he shouted or humiliated her publicly, but because he never truly saw her. And somehow, that hurt far more. The marriage between Lady Evelyn Harrow and the Duke of Blackthorn had begun like many aristocratic unions in London society. Necessary, strategic, convenient. Evelyn's father had been drowning in debt after several failed investments. Adrian, one of the wealthiest dukes in England, required a respectable bride to silence growing pressure from Parliament and society alike. Rumors surrounding his refusal to marry had become impossible to ignore. People called him cold, untouchable, a man whose heart had frozen years ago. At first, Evelyn had believed those rumors unfair. During their brief courtship, Adrian had been reserved but courteous. He listened carefully when she spoke. Once, he even smiled faintly when she mentioned loving music more than ballroom gossip. She had carried that smile in her heart for weeks. But after the wedding, the distance between them grew like winter ivy across stone walls. Adrian spent most evenings inside his study or away managing his estates. They attended dinners together, rode beside one another during public appearances, and shared the same enormous bedroom chamber divided by silence. He never insulted her, never touched her harshly, never betrayed her publicly. Yet Evelyn felt invisible all the same. One evening during a grand gathering at Ashford House, she stood among glittering chandeliers while noblewomen circled nearby like elegant birds searching for weakness. The Duke dances with everyone except his wife. How embarrassing. She looks heartbroken. Evelyn pretended not to hear. Across the ballroom, Adrian spoke with Lady Beatrice Whitmore, a beautiful widow admired by half the aristocracy. Beatrice laughed softly at something he said, her gloved hand resting lightly on his arm. A strange pain tightened Evelyn's chest. She looked away quickly. Moments later, Adrian approached her. "You disappeared earlier," he said. "I was here. You seemed upset." She almost laughed at that. Months of distance, and now he noticed sadness only because it stood in the middle of a crowded ballroom. "I am merely tired." His gaze lingered on her face. "If someone insulted you, no one said anything I have not already heard before." The words slipped out before she could stop them. For the first time that evening, Adrian looked genuinely unsettled. But before he could respond, another nobleman approached requesting Evelyn for a dance. Lord Nathaniel Ashcombe was kind, charming, and dangerously observant. Unlike Adrian, he noticed things. "You look unhappy tonight," Nathaniel murmured as they moved across the ballroom floor. Evelyn forced a small smile. "You should not say such things to a married woman." Then perhaps her husband should notice first. Breath caught slightly. Across the room, Adrian watched them dance. His expression revealed nothing. Yet for the rest of the evening he spoke very little. Winter settled heavily over Blackthorn Manor after that. Snow covered the gardens in silver silence, while tension slowly deepened between husband and wife. Evelyn stopped waiting for Adrian to join her during breakfast, stopped lingering near his study in hopes he might invite conversation, stopped searching his face for affection that never arrived. Instead, she began rebuilding parts of herself she had nearly forgotten. She spent mornings reading beside the library windows. She visited tenants across the estate and quietly funded repairs for struggling families using her own inheritance. She played piano in empty drawing rooms simply because music still made her feel alive. And slowly, the servants noticed something changing. The Duchess no longer looked fragile. There was sadness in her still, but also dignity, strength. One afternoon, Adrian returned unexpectedly from London and paused outside the music room after hearing piano melodies echo through the corridor. Evelyn sat alone at the grand piano, sunlight falling softly across her face. She did not notice him watching. Her expression carried peaceful concentration, untouched by the anxiety she once wore around him. Adrian remained still longer than intended. Something unfamiliar stirred painfully inside him. Regret. Later that evening during supper he attempted conversation. "The steward mentioned you visited the southern cottages." Evelyn nodded calmly. "Several roofs required repair before the next storm. You paid for it yourself. They needed help." Adrian studied her quietly. "You should have informed me. It was simpler this way." The word lingered unpleasantly between them. Once she had sought his approval in everything. Now she spoke as though his opinion no longer mattered at all. And strangely, that unsettled him more than anger ever could. Days later, another invitation arrived from Ashford House. A winter masquerade. Evelyn initially refused. "You should attend," Adrian said unexpectedly while reviewing correspondence near the fireplace. She looked up from her book. "Why?" "Society already speculates enough about our marriage." The words stung more than they should have. Not because he was wrong, but because appearances still seemed more important to him than truth. "As you wish, Your Grace." The masquerade glittered with candlelight, gold masks, and swirling music. Evelyn wore silver silk embroidered with tiny pearls. For the first time in many months, heads turned when she entered the ballroom, not because she was the Duke of Blackthorn's wife, but because she seemed radiant, alive. Adrian noticed immediately, and so did every other man in the room. Nathaniel approached her first, bowing elegantly. "I was beginning to think London had lost its most beautiful Duchess." Laughed softly. From across the ballroom, Adrian watched the exchange with tightening silence. Throughout the evening, Evelyn danced repeatedly while Adrian remained surrounded by politicians and nobles. Yet his attention drifted toward her constantly, toward her smile, toward the way candlelight warmed her features, toward the realization that other men were beginning to see what he had ignored for far too long. Late into the evening, he finally crossed the ballroom toward her. "Dance with me." Request surprised her. Adrian almost never danced. Still, she placed her hand in his. As music swelled around them, he guided her carefully across the floor. "You seem happier lately," he said quietly. Evelyn met his gaze calmly. "Perhaps I simply became tired of being sad." Honesty of it struck him harder than accusation. "I never wished to hurt you." "No," she whispered. "You simply never wished for me at all." Hand tightened slightly at her waist. For a moment the world around them seemed to disappear beneath candlelight and music. Adrian opened his mouth to respond, but Evelyn stepped back as the dance ended and walked away. That night, Adrian remained awake long after midnight. For years he had convinced himself distance was safer. After losing his mother young and watching his father destroy himself through grief, Adrian learned early that love made people weak, vulnerable, foolish. So he buried emotion beneath duty, control, silence. But somewhere along the way, Evelyn had quietly entered spaces inside him he never intended to open again. He remembered her nervous smile during their wedding vows, the way she always asked servants about their families, the softness in her voice while reading near the fire, the loneliness in her eyes whenever he left the room. And suddenly, the thought of losing her felt unbearable. Weeks later, London society buzzed with shocking gossip. Lord Nathaniel Ashcombe had begun openly courting the Duchess's attention. Flowers arrived regularly at Blackthorn Manor. Invitations addressed specifically to Evelyn appeared nearly every week. At first, she declined them. Then slowly, she stopped declining, not because she loved Nathaniel, but because for the first time in years, someone made her feel seen. One afternoon, Adrian entered the drawing room unexpectedly to find Evelyn laughing softly beside Nathaniel over tea. The sight stirred something sharp and unfamiliar in his chest, jealousy. Nathaniel rose politely. "Your Grace," barely acknowledged him. "I was unaware we entertained visitors privately now." Coldness in his tone silenced the room instantly. Evelyn set down her teacup carefully. "Lord Ashcombe brought books from London." "See," Nathaniel sensed the tension immediately. After a brief farewell, he departed quietly. The moment the doors closed, silence settled heavily between husband and wife. "You embarrassed him," Evelyn said, Adrian's jaw tightened. "You seem remarkably concerned for his feelings. At least someone should be." The words hit harder than she intended. Adrian stared at her. "You believe I do not care for you." Evelyn laughed softly then, though sadness filled the sound. "I believe you married me because it was convenient. I believe you tolerate me because society expects it. And I believe I spent months begging silently for affection from a man who never intended to give it." Her voice trembled slightly near the end. Adrian stepped toward her. "Evelyn, no," she shook her head gently. "Please do not offer kindness now merely because another man notices my existence." Accusation cut painfully close to truth. For once, Adrian had no defense. That evening, Evelyn requested separate chambers. The news spread through the manor by morning, and for the first time since childhood, Adrian Blackthorn felt truly afraid. Days passed in unbearable tension. Evelyn remained polite but distant. Adrian attempted conversation repeatedly, only to find himself shut out by the very walls he had built between them first. Then came the storm. A violent winter tempest swept across the countryside late one evening while Evelyn traveled home from visiting a neighboring estate. Her carriage wheel shattered along a frozen road several miles from Blackthorn Manor. By the time news reached Adrian, snow had already buried most pathways. Without hesitation, he rode out into the storm himself. Servants begged him to wait until morning. He ignored them. The wind howled viciously across the hills as Adrian searched through darkness and snow. Panic clawed steadily at his chest with every passing mile. Then finally, near the edge of a forest road, he found the damaged carriage. Evelyn stood beside a lantern wrapped in a heavy cloak, shivering violently while servants struggled with the horses. The moment she saw him riding toward her through the storm, something inside her cracked unexpectedly. Adrian dismounted immediately. "Are you hurt?" "No." Relief washed visibly across his face. He removed his own coat despite the freezing wind and wrapped it carefully around her shoulders. "You should not have come yourself," she whispered. His eyes held hers intensely. "Of course I came." The quiet sincerity in his voice stole her breath. During the ride home, Adrian kept one arm firmly around her as snow battered the carriage walls. And for the first time in months, Evelyn no longer felt cold. Later that night, after ensuring she was safely warmed beside the fireplace, Adrian remained standing near the door as though uncertain whether he deserved to stay. The silence between them felt different now, fragile, honest. "I was terrified," he admitted quietly. Evelyn looked up slowly. "When they said your carriage had vanished," he swallowed hard. "I could not breathe." Emotion tightened painfully in her chest. Adrian stepped closer. "All my life I believed love only led to suffering. I thought distance would protect us both." His voice lowered. "But losing you would destroy me far more than loving you ever could." Tears filled Evelyn's eyes before she could stop them. "I waited so long to hear that." He knelt before her then, something no one in London society could have imagined from the proud Duke of Blackthorn. "I know I do not deserve forgiveness easily," he said softly. "But if there is any part of your heart willing to try again, I will spend the rest of my life earning it." Stared at him through trembling tears. This was not the cold Duke society feared. This was simply a man afraid of loving too late. Slowly she touched his face. "You hurt me terribly, Adrian. I know. I cannot become that lonely woman again." "Never will," he whispered. The certainty in his voice broke the final wall between them. Adrian pressed his forehead gently against hers as the storm raged outside the manor windows. But inside, warmth finally returned to Blackthorn Manor. The months that followed changed them both quietly. Adrian no longer buried himself endlessly in work. He accompanied Evelyn during walks through the gardens, listened while she played piano, and spoke to her not as obligation, but as companion, as partner. And slowly London society noticed another shocking transformation. The Duke of Blackthorn smiled now, mostly when looking at his wife. At the season's final grand ball, whispers once again followed them through glittering halls. But this time the whispers sounded different. They looked truly in love. I have never seen the Duke watch anyone that way. During the final dance of the evening, Adrian held Evelyn close beneath golden candlelight. "You once asked if I ever truly saw you," he murmured. Evelyn smiled faintly. "And see you everywhere." Her eyes softened. The music slowed around them while distant chandeliers shimmered overhead like stars trapped inside glass. For a long moment neither spoke. They no longer needed to, because sometimes love did not arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived quietly. Through regret, through patience, through storms survived together. And sometimes the coldest hearts loved most deeply once they finally learned how.